friends, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. Welcome to my June reading vlog. I thought we would sit outside. The weather has been so perfect lately, like not too hot, not a lot of bugs yet. Saying that, I can see a couple bugs flying around me, but I thought I would share with you the books that I've been starting the month with. So I did finish off The Tempest, which was really fun. Last year I read a Shakespeare play a month, and they were all plays that were new to me, that were not maybe as popular, but this year I thought it'd be fun to read at least a couple, maybe not one a month, because here it's May and this is my first Shakespeare of the year. Or well, I started it in May, finished it in June. I would like to reread a couple of the more popular Shakespeares that, you know, it's just been a little while. And Shakespeare's language really is so beautiful. It's so wonderful to just immerse yourself in it. His turns of phrase are so creative and so lyrical, and he turns on a dime. First there's this like quick, fast, witty sort of repartee between the characters that's like very funny, and then there's like a romantic scene that's so, you know, heartfelt, and then there's like a more reflective scene where Prospero is, you know, sort of musing on life and musing on his powers. It seems like every Shakespeare play, even last year I discovered the lesser known plays, has its famous line that, you know, you hear quoted when you come across it in the play. You think, oh, that's right, that's where that's from. In The Tempest, there were lots of beautiful lines, but the kind of famous one that stood out to me was this one. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, we're all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Sir, I am vexed. Bear with my weakness. My old brain is troubled. Be not disturbed with my infirmity. Yes, that is in Act 4, but there were lots of other quotations that I copied out here. Yond same cloud cannot choose but fall by pailfuls. I liked that. That was one of the descriptions of a tempest, of a storm. And there are definitely black clouds sometimes you see that you feel like are just gonna dump their load on you. Here was one of the romantic lines. Might I but through my prison once a day behold this maid, all corners else of the earth let liberty make use of. Space enough have I in such a prison. It is foul weather in us all, good sir, when you are cloudy. There's another weather metaphor. I liked this one from the very beginning, where the king's men are kind of getting in the way of the sailors and not helping when there's a storm and, you know, everything's chaotic. And the sailor says to the lord, you are a counselor. If you can command these elements to silence and work the peace of the presence, we will not hand a rope more. Use your authority. If you cannot, give thanks you have lived so long, and make yourself ready in your cabin for the mischance of the hour, if it's so hap. That kind of reminded me of, I think it's in As You Like It, that the king is exiled from court, and he says that, you know, the forest, the rocks are his counselors. The elements are his counselors now that would feelingly persuade him what he is. This is the Arden edition, and they always have really great notes in the introduction, and then also, like, you can see half the page is like notes. In fact, there was a whole page about whether there was a typo in Shakespeare and whether it should be busiest or idlest. And it was like going on and on about different people's ideas, and the editor was like, no, that's wrong, I think it's this. So just really fascinating to read all of the backstory and like the context. There was another interesting little note about how, I guess in Shakespeare's time, sometimes you would take out, as it were, travel insurance, but the idea was that you would like put up a certain amount of money, and if you didn't come back, you lost that money. But if you did come back, you got like 4 or 5 times that money back, which is that how perilous travel was in those days. I have to admit that I didn't read all of the notes. There were lots of times, this is an old copy and it's starting to fall apart. Floutum and coutum and scoutum and floutum, thought is free. That's a common Shakespearean basically insult, or I mean, I guess it's sort of like a in-your-face man, but I kind of like it. Thought is free. I think that needs to come back as a as a comeback. Yes, so I have to decide which Shakespeare to start on next, but another classic I'm hoping to read this month, which I am thinking of doing a classics on my TBR for this summer video, so if you already watched that, then you have already heard about some of these, but Mrs. Dalloway is set in June. I don't know if we ever hear the specific date in June, but it's been a long time since I reread Virginia Woolf. The first time I read Virginia Woolf, she didn't really speak to me. And the second time, a couple years later when I picked her up, she really did, and I just really got into the rhythm of it, and there were just some really deep, beautiful ideas. So I'm excited to try it out again now a couple years later and see how it strikes me this time. Oh, the sun, look, is moving. I was in the shady spot, and now I'm not. The sun is peeking over. The sun has found me out. So I'm going to try to quickly finish this segment up before my lighting is completely rearranged. I have picked up Willa Cather, A Lost Lady. I just randomly picked this up at a used bookstore a while ago. I have been meaning to read more Willa Cather. I just thought it'd be interesting. I think on the back it says this is something like an answer to Madame Bovary, but set in the U.S. It's a fading railroad town on the Western Plains. Sweetwater is where it takes place, which I haven't felt like much has happened, and I'm a couple chapters in, but it's a pretty slim one, so I'm hoping I'll just get through it, and it'll be interesting to have read another Willa Cather. You guys have told me that I will probably like Death Comes to the Archbishop. That's in one of my TBR jars. So I'm excited for whenever I pick that one up out of my TBR. I keep leaning forward to try to avoid the sun. I did read another Agatha Christie, Taken at the Flood. There's a local bookstore near me, and I like to go in it, but whenever I go in it, I feel like I should buy something. Like I feel bad just going in and browsing and then leaving. And I like to kind of build up my Agatha Christie shelves. They look so cool, the spines. So it's like, that's kind of my excuse, is that whenever I'm in there, I just buy myself another Agatha Christie. Taken at the Flood is set after World War II. In the first half, there was very little Poirot. Although I feel like in the second half, Poirot really shines in this one, which in some ways he was a little bit absent from Appointment with Death. I did like that one, and the setting in Petra was really cool. But I think there was more Poirot in this one, and the twist, I thought, was more dramatic and more unexpected and like more convoluted and really fascinating. A few weeks after marrying an attractive widow, Gordon Claude is tragically killed by a bomb blast in the London Blitz. Overnight, the former Mrs. Underhay finds herself in sole possession of the Claude family fortune. Basically, this Gordon Claude, who was killed in the Blitz, had always supported the rest of his family, and they'd always really leaned on him. And now, suddenly, they're not getting the inheritance they expected because he married and then died, and so I guess his will was invalid. All the money went to his wife. And so this book deals with the theme of like, okay, well, if you leaned on someone your whole life, what happens when that support is gone? Yes, I definitely did enjoy this one. Although the next Poirot I pick up, I need to maybe do some research. I'd like Poirot to be there the whole time. The last book that I was going to tell you guys about is an ebook that I've been reading. My mom has been on a massive Anthony Trollope kick lately, and she's always like, oh, you should read this one, and then a couple months later she'd be like, no, actually this one is the best, you should read this one. So I finally decided to pick up Rachel Ray, which I've been enjoying very much. It's about two sisters and a mother, so a little bit of a Sense and Sensibility vibe, except not both sisters are very pleasant. The older sister is a widow. Her husband died when she was quite young. The mother is also a widow. The father has died, so they're not very well off. The older sister, though, is very obsessed with religion and like very distrustful of like everyone and everything. And so when the younger daughter meets a young man and like wants to go to a dance, the older sister is just beyond measure horrified. But my mom has promised me it has a happy ending and that everything works out well. And I do like the characters, especially when the younger daughter and the mother are together, like they have all sorts of cozy times. I think it's all gonna turn out well, and I am enjoying it so far. little hammock reading vlog segment to tell you what I have been making progress on. I somehow forgot to include Anthony Trollope and Rachel Ray. Rachel Ray, his book, not the Rachel Ray we know, who's popular in the world today. But I forgot to include him in my classics TBR, summer classics to read video. I'm happy to say I hugely enjoyed it. My mom definitely had an excellent recommendation. The characters were just all very engaging. It's not like a super action heavy plot. It's more about the individuals and like the town they live in. It's such a great kind of portrait of this time period in England. It's kind of like watching Downton Abbey or something, except without the scandalous bits, which I skip anyway, and more told from the perspective of like the lower and middle class rather than the elites. But one fun thing about reading this is that Anthony Trollope is so gossipy about like his own characters and his own scenarios. He's like, well, if this character had like known about this little feud that was going on between the other two, she could have like used that to her advantage. And it's just, it feels like you're sort of watching a TV show of this with Anthony Trollope, and he's like commenting on all of it. He was not a gentleman. I do not mean to say that he was a thief or a liar, nor do I mean hereby to complain that he picked his teeth with a fork and misplaced his H's. I am by no means prepared to define what I do mean, thinking, however, that most men and most women will understand me. I liked this observation too. We, all of us, read more in the faces of those with whom we hold converse than we are aware of doing. Of the truth or want of truth in every word spoken to us we judge, in great part, by the face of the speaker. By the face of every man and woman seen by us, whether they speak or are silent, we form a judgment, and in 9 cases out of 10 our judgment is true. It is because our 10th judgment, that judgment which has been wrong, comes back upon us always with the effects of its error, that we teach ourselves to say that appearances cannot be trusted. If we did not trust them, we should be walking ever in doubt, in darkness, and in ignorance. Yeah, so Rachel Ray was just a delightful, chatty, gossipy trip to Devonshire. There's this young man, Luke Rowan, who has inherited a share in a brewery. And rather than just kind of sitting back idly and taking an income, which previously that's how it was done. And the main brewer, Mr. Tappet, or T. His wife calls him T, like Mrs. Elton calls Mr. E. Anyway, Luke Rowan wants to make good beer because Mr. Tappet makes bad beer. Everyone knows it, and it's kind of funny the way like people are like, well, if he makes bad beer honestly and people are dumb enough to buy it, like, why shouldn't he? Just now I have beer in my very soul. I should say though, brewery is certainly an element that is present throughout the story, but it's not like that's the main focus. It's the women, Mrs. Ray, the mother, Dorothea, the older sister, and Rachel, the younger sister. Rachel especially is the heroine of the book. It's really charming, and I don't know if this counts as a spoiler. Also, I kind of already said it, not even meaning it as a spoiler, but if you don't even want an assurance, then this is a spoiler. But it does all turn out well in the end. It feels like throughout the story, it's like everyone says that Luke Rowan doesn't mean what he says, and that, you know, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, and like Rachel shouldn't trust him. But it's just this whole comedy of errors where in other books you feel like, oh, that would have been the last mistake. But in this book, there is a happy ending, so don't worry. Here's one of the workers in the brewery. He had not himself been ambitious of good beer, but the idea had almost startled him into acquiescence by its brilliancy. Highly recommend. Rachel Ray also finished A Lost Lady, which, you know, I would recommend this. I wasn't sure about it. It didn't really grab me at first. And the first part that like really grabbed my attention was actually the description of the husband. His clumsy dignity covered a deep nature and a conscience that had never been juggled with. His repose was like that of a mountain. His sanity asked nothing, claimed nothing. It was so simple that it brought a hush over distracted creatures. Captain Forrester lifted his glass, the frail stem between his thick fingers, and glancing round the table at his guests and at Mrs. Forrester, said, "Happy days." It was the toast he always drank at dinner, the invocation he was sure to utter when he took a glass of whiskey with an old friend. Whoever had heard him say it once liked to hear him say it again. Nobody else could utter those 2 words as he did, with such gravity and high courtesy. It seemed a solemn moment, seemed to knock at the door of fate, behind which all days, happy and otherwise, are hidden. Neil drank his wine with a pleasant shiver, thinking that nothing else made life seem so precarious, the future so cryptic and unfathomable, as that brief toast uttered by the massive man, Happy Days. So yes, after I got to that, I was a little worried. You heard me read earlier from the back that this is in some ways an answer to Madame Bovary. And it was pretty obvious from the first chapters that Mrs. Forrester is by no means as discontent as Madame Bovary, but she's certainly not faithful to her husband. And, you know, in Madame Bovary, really It's been a while since I read Madame Bovary. I don't really feel tempted to pick it up again, but I don't remember the husband or any of the men being very sympathetic. I mean, by the end, I wasn't super sympathetic towards Madame Bovary herself either. But I was just worried, like, oh, Captain Forrester seems so interesting. Like, how is Willie Cather going to treat him? But I thought she did treat him really well. The characters are just all really intricate, and she does a great job at, like, exploring their sort of vagaries and how the way they're paired together really affects them. Neil, a young man from the town who, if you heard that quotation from my classics video, ends up reading all sorts of classics. He strikes up an acquaintance, a friendship with the Forresters, and he's sort of fascinated by Mrs. Forrester. Where Mrs. Forrester was, dullness was impossible, Neil believed. The charm of her conversation was not so much in what she said, though she was often witty, but in the quick recognition of her eyes and the living quality of her voice itself. One could talk with her about the most trivial things and go away with a high sense of elation. The secret of it, he supposed, was that she couldn't help being interested in people, even very commonplace people. She often caricatured people to their faces, and they were not offended, but greatly flattered. Nothing pleased one more than to provoke her laughter. Then you felt you were getting on with her. It was her form of commenting, or of agreeing with you, and appreciating you when you said something interesting, and it often told you a great deal that was both too direct and too elusive for words. So Mrs. Forrester is definitely a bit of an enigma, and part of the book is dealing with Neil wondering, like, where does her charm come from? I'll give the spoiler warning because it is a little bit of a surprise which direction the story goes. It does not go in the same direction as Madame Bovary, and we do keep our respect for Captain Forrester. There's just a lot of nuance about the relationship between Captain Forrester and Mrs. Forrester. Really, Captain Forrester, she is a good wife to him in some ways, but she's not a faithful wife. But he kind of knows that. He knows her through and through. And his sort of solidness, his respectability actually enables her charm in a lot of ways. And when Captain Forrester, first he loses his money, and then he suffers a few strokes, and you get a sense from the very beginning of the book that, you know, things are about to go downhill for the Forresters. But it's really beautiful to see Neil's relationship with them and to kind of follow along as he sort of puzzles out their relationship and puzzles out the intricacies of Mrs. Forrester's character. In the end, we find out that without Captain Forrester, Mrs. Forrester is kind of just a hussy. I think that's the best word that I can think of for it. Like, her old charm and her old determination really leave her. And there's this interesting description of how the women in the town finally get to, like, poke around all of her house, which before, when Captain Forrester was well and she had money, like, she really always entertained them in the parlor, and she was very much the hostess. And it's not that she was unfriendly, but, like, they never got beyond the parlor. Whereas when they were sick, the women of the town kind of used that as an excuse to, like, horn in and like into the kitchen and into the linen closets, and they're, like, surprised at the lack of glamour there. And that was an interesting theme too, that, like, a certain amount of the glamour and sort of mystique of Mrs. Forrester was in the eye of the beholder almost. It's like, because there was this mystery, you imagined more glamour than maybe there really was. And, like, when the Forresters lose their money, they don't really have a lot of friends who come and help them. And Neil later reflects that partly the friends didn't want to lose their good memories of Mrs. Forrester bright and sparkling and Captain Forrester in good health and in good wealth. So no one really stood by them when they came down in the world, except for Neil. I liked this. He had the satisfaction of those who keep faith. So yeah, I ended up marking lots of passages because there were just lots of interesting things. For years, Neil and his uncle, the Dalzells and all her friends, had thought of the captain as a drag upon his wife, a care that drained her and dimmed her and kept her from being all that she might be. But without him, she was like a wind without ballast, driven hither and thither by every wind. She was flighty and perverse. She seemed to have lost her faculty of discrimination, her power of easily and graciously keeping everyone in his proper place. It's interesting as a description of this moment in time, too, in the American West, because this railroad town is really fading, and there was all this optimism and hope and, like, investment from people into the West, and now that has kind of drained away, and you're left with these people like Ivy Peters, which I kept thinking his name was Poison Ivy. That's how I thought of him the whole time, because I think they make that comparison at the beginning. These totally unscrupulous characters who do not have the same grit and the same strength of character as the sort of cowboys that came before them, people like Captain Forrester. And so Neil is like reflecting on how he's sort of here in the twilight. He's seeing this last glow of glamour from, you know, these railroad barons like the captain, and this was the very end of the road-making West. The men who had put plains and mountains under the iron harness were old. Some were poor, and even the successful ones were hunting for rest and a brief reprieve from death. It was already gone, that age. Nothing could ever bring it back. The taste and smell and song of it, the visions those men had seen in the air and followed. These he had caught in a kind of afterglow in their own faces, and this would always be his. Anyway, towards the beginning, I was like, am I gonna DNF this? Am I just gonna get rid of this book? But actually, it was definitely worth the $3, and I'm very glad that I finished it, and I'm glad to have it on my shelf. I have started Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway, which should be kind of interesting. From Mrs. Forrester to Mrs. Dalloway. In this vivid portrait of one day in a woman's life, Clarissa Dalloway is preoccupied with the last-minute details of a party she is to give that evening. As she readies her house, she is flooded with memories and re-examines the choices she has made over the course of her life. I guess that's as good of a description as you're going to get of Mrs. Dalloway, because as I was reading just the first 12 pages, I was like, how do you sum this up? It's so like stream of consciousness really entering into Mrs. Dalloway's thinking. So like you have both the like actual things she's doing, going around London, getting ready for the party, and then you have her memories of, oh, that reminds me of this, or this person is coming back from India. But then you also have her more sort of philosophical wonderings and musings about everything. Heaven only knows why one loves it so, how one sees it so, making it up, building it round one, tumbling it, creating it every moment afresh. But the various frumps, the most dejected of miseries sitting on doorsteps, drink their downfall, do the same. Can't be dealt with, she felt positive, by acts of parliament for that very reason. They love life. In people's eyes, in the swing, tramp, and trudge, in the bellow and the uproar, the carriages, motor cars, omnibuses, vans, sandwich men shuffling and swinging, brass bands, barrel organs, and the triumph and the jingle and the strange high singing of some aeroplane overhead was what she loved. Life, London, this moment of June. Yes, it's been a lovely June so far, and lots of excellent reading, and I'm sure more to come. Oh. Totally playing dead. Oh no! It's like it's alive! So tiny, and yet it's like had gotten it on camera just now. A turtle swam by underneath the water, and the water was like still, so I could see him perfectly, and he seemed to sort of nod up at me the way another kayaker would have said, and said, you know, nice evening to be out for a paddle, isn't it? But then he disappeared under all the lilies. Oh, I would have liked for him to say hello in the vlog. I keep paddling around, hoping I'll spot him. As the turtle said, it is in fact a beautiful evening to be out. Well, friends, here we are approaching the end of June, and I have quite a few books to update you guys on. One book I've been reading this month is The Glassblowers by Daphne du Maurier. It was a recommendation from the Bookish Kingdom. I had it in one of my TBR jars, and let's see, 68%. So that's pretty good. I'm getting there. It's longer than I realized. Sometimes when you buy an ebook, like, you don't realize the length the way you would if you bought a physical book. Daphne du Maurier was inspired by her own ancestors who came from France. They were master glassblowers right before the French Revolution, at the time of the French Revolution. So that's the time period, and it's definitely action-packed, really fascinating. Obviously, tons of research. Fun to hear just about the glassblowing trade and how, like, there was really a hierarchy, but like everyone was really a family and extremely close-knit. All the workers from, you know, the master craftsmen all the way down to like the people who kept the fires alight at night. Sophie Duval is actually telling the history of her family to her nephew, Louis Mathurin Busson du Maurier, Daphne du Maurier. And she is revealing that what he thought his ancestors were is not really exactly correct. Sophie had 3 brothers, and she and her brothers were growing up just before the French Revolution. So they became adults kind of right as the revolution was happening. And we did get to see them growing up. So we met their parents, and like, I love Sophie's mother. She's just absolutely the best. The glass trade was going pretty well because the aristocrats were buying lots of glass. And there were some family problems. Sophie's older brother, Robert, is basically an adventurer who like has no morals and like is always up to some sort of scheme. But of course, when the revolution hits, like everything kind of goes haywire and everyone's sort of values are reshuffled, everyone's allegiances are reshuffled. You really kind of experience it event by event, which in some ways I feel like in this book, there's just so much historical detail to work in that I think was kind of primary for Daphne du Maurier. And I feel like the characters and like the story of their lives is a little bit secondary. If that makes sense, like there are times when Sophie manages to be in Paris or to be somewhere when like a riot's happening or somewhere when some important historical event is happening, and I feel like, well, that's just because Daphne du Maurier needed her to be there. I do still like the characters, and I feel like I am getting a better sense of Daphne du Maurier's like suspenseful writing in this. The first part, actually, before the revolution, didn't grab me as much, but as soon as the revolution started, it's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Like, how's this gonna unfold? Which, when I was reading Rebecca, I did not get a sense of suspense because I was so annoyed with the heroine the whole time. I just couldn't stand her. When the revolution first starts and like the lawlessness first starts, there are some people who like instantly buy into it. I like how Sophie recognizes the nuance. Obviously, there were aristocrats who were behaving terribly while the poor were starving, and like it was a terrible situation, obviously, but does that really give you the right to steal somebody's silver and all of their fancy stuff and bring it into our house? Aren't you still a thief? Pierre is one of Sophie's brothers, and he has like big ideas about how to change the world. He's a follower of Rousseau, and I like how at one point Sophie notices that like he thinks he can teach all of France how to behave when he can't even keep control of his own 2 kids. Reminds me of Jordan Peterson, like put your own house in order, clean up your room. Learn to actually apply discipline to your own life before you think you can apply discipline and fix all the problems of the world. Because Sophie like notices all of the contradictions of the revolution, and like her brother Robert is definitely in on it. And he is like switching sides, whatever is convenient to him. Instead of blowing glass, you blow rumor across the countryside. Like he's just spreading rumor and making everyone panic and fear. It's really terrible to see the way the rumor and the fear spreads across and like is just a disease that takes over the whole population. So much of it is unfounded, and so much of it is really just designed to manipulate the people and manipulate the situation. The system might one day change, but human nature remained the same, and there were always people who profited at the expense of others. Sophie's mother is still alive in the midst of the revolution, and I love how she keeps her head, has her steady, usual good sense. I'm against nothing that benefits honest people. If a man wishes to get on in life, he should be encouraged to do so. I don't see what that has to do with revolution. Your father became a rich man through his own efforts. He began at the bottom, like any apprentice boy. My father had talent, I argued. Talented men will always make their way. The new laws are designed to help those who have nothing. Don't you believe it, replied my mother. The peasants are no better off than they were in the past. It is the middlemen who are climbing to the top today, shopkeepers and the like. I would not grudge it them if they kept their manners. And then Sophie's little girl wants to eat too much, and her mother is saying, stop, that's more than is good for her. She's a revolutionary. Revolutionaries always demand more and are never satisfied. That is my point, said my mother, taking Sophie Magdalene from me and patting her back for wind. She does not know what is good for her any more than all the so-called patriots in the country. Someone should have the nerve and the power to say enough, but they're like a lot of sheep without a shepherd. It is just so terrifying to see the way people just take it to more and more extremes. One of Sophie's own brothers just is fanatical, and like they're just about power and impressing their will on other people. They're not actually willing to listen to anyone else. I actually put this down because it was just making me so like anxious and stressed reading about how the world was totally upside down. And there was just no common sense, no common ground. I don't know, I was just drawing parallels between this time period and today's time period, and it was just making me more and more anxious. Like, how do you even reason with people like this? It was a great recommendation though, and I am looking forward to finishing it. Definitely really interesting deep dive into this time period from the perspective of just like an ordinary French person out in the countryside, just trying to make it through all of these crazy events. I have been making progress in my audiobook of the Aeneid. I think I just finished book 3. Dido and Aeneas are just falling out. And it's funny, on the one hand, you really feel for Dido. It feels like she's kind of been this puppet of the gods. So her rage against Aeneas and against the heavens is understandable. But also, like at the very beginning when she first meets Aeneas and is talking to her sister, I love this description of how she goes to confide in her sister. Like in another book, another character might just say, oh, I have a crush on this guy. But no, in the Aeneid, when dawn swept earth with Phoebus's torch and burned away night gloom and damp, this queen, far gone and ill, confided to the sister of her heart, my sister Anna, quandaries and dreams have come to frighten me, such dreams. Think what a stranger yesterday found lodging in our house. How princely, how courageous, what a soldier. I can believe him in the line of gods, and this is no delusion. When she's talking to her sister, though, she says, I have a crush on this guy, but I made this promise not to remarry. And if I should break that promise, let me be cast down into the deepest depths of Hades. And it's like, don't say that. And then when you break your vow, be like, why am I cast into the deepest depths of Hades? It's like you spoke that fate over yourself. There is absolutely beautiful lyrical language though. Everything is just so rich. You know, even at the very beginning, we hear about how Aeneas and the Trojans are tossed by storms. And of course, it's the doing of the angry gods. Juno has been plotting, smoldering, putting these questions to herself. The god made her way to storm cloud country, Aeolia, the weather-breeding isle. Here in a vast cavern, King Aeolus rules the contending winds and moaning gales as warden of their prison. Round the walls they chafe and bluster underground. The din makes a great mountain murmur overhead. High on a citadel enthroned, scepter in hand, he mollifies their fury, else they might flay the sea and sweep away land masses in deep sky through empty air. Isn't that just so much richer than like any scientific explanation you can think of? I mean, I know science obviously has brought lots of great things to our world. Lots of things are possible through science, but seeing like through the eyes of the ancients the way they looked at the world, there's just such a beauty and richness to it that, you know, we've kind of lost. I am about 40 pages away from finishing Mrs. Dalloway, so I think I'll be able to finish this by the end of the month. Whenever you sit down and read Virginia Woolf, or at least when I do, when I stand up, it's like I'm almost a little disoriented. Like my brain has kind of flowed into the strange stream of consciousness narrative style of Virginia Woolf, and like it takes a while to sort of get back into to ordinary life. But there are so many beautiful reflections. There are also times when the characters say to themselves, like, either this was just ridiculous and absurd, or it was the most important moment of life. And you get that feeling with the book and the writing style too. It's like either this is deeply meaningful or it doesn't really mean anything. I definitely do find a lot of beautiful meaning in it, but there are then also passages where I'm kind of just reading and I'm not able to follow it along. One thing I was noticing is how like the passing of the hours and the striking of the clock, like Big Ben, are very much an image and are important. It's not just Big Ben, it's all the clocks of London. Ah, said St. Margaret, like a hostess who comes into her drawing room on the very stroke of the hour and finds her guests there already. I'm not late. No, it is precisely 11:30, she says. Yet, though she is perfectly right, her voice, being the voice of the hostess, is reluctant to inflict its individuality. Some grief for the past holds it back, some concern for the present. It is 11:30, she says, and the sound of St. Margaret's glides into the recesses of the heart and buries itself in ring after ring of sound, like something alive which wants to confide itself, to disperse itself, to be, with a tremor of delight at rest. Like Clarissa herself, thought Peter Walsh. The sentences always just go on and on. You never know where to stop. But isn't that a neat image, like comparing a clock ringing to like this moment of a party? I just love how she kind of personifies these experiences like a clock ringing in that way. Here's how the clocks of Harley Street speak. Shredding and slicing, dividing and subdividing, the clocks of Harley Street nibbled at the June day, counseled submission, upheld authority, and pointed out in chorus the supreme advantages of a sense of proportion, until the mound of time was so far diminished that a commercial clock, suspended above a shop in Oxford Street, announced, genially and fraternally, as if it were a pleasure to Messrs. Rigby and Lowndes to give the information gratis, that it was 1:30. One last clock quotation, I promise. Big Ben has struck the half hour. But here the other clock, the clock which always struck 2 minutes after Big Ben, came shuffling in with its lap full of odds and ends, which it dumped down, as if Big Ben were all very well with his majesty laying down the law, so solemn, so just. But you must remember all sorts of little things besides. Mrs. Marsham, Ellie Henderson, glasses for ices, all sorts of little things came flooding and lapping and dancing in on the wake of that solemn stroke which lay flat like a bar of gold on the sea. This makes me feel like I need more clocks that are actually ticking and striking the hour, because I rarely hear clocks striking the hour. So there's just one other quotation that I thought it would be fun to read, because it's kind of the follow-up of the quotation that I read in my summer TBR, which was about how Mrs. Dalloway doesn't like this lady, Miss Kilman, because she's just sort of shriveled up. I think she says her soul had rusted with all her grievances. But Mrs. Dalloway recognizes that it's not really Miss Kilman she hates, it's the idea of her and like all of these other things that aren't really Miss Kilman's fault, like have kind of congregated in this idea, and it actually becomes this monster. It rasped her, though, to have stirring about in her this brutal monster, to hear twigs cracking and feel hooves planted down in the depths of that leaf-encumbered forest, the soul. Never to be content quite, or quite secure, for at any moment the brute would be stirring, this hatred, which, especially since her illness, had power to make her feel scraped, hurt in her spine, gave her physical pain, and made all pleasure and beauty and friendship and being well and being loved and making her home delightful rock, quiver, and bend, as if indeed there were a monster grubbing at the roots, as if the whole panoply of content were nothing but self-love, this hatred. I think that's just so insightful, that like hatred does eat away at you more than it does like accomplish anything. But then on the next page, she began to go with Miss Pym from jar to jar, choosing. Nonsense, nonsense, she said to herself, more and more gently, as if this beauty, this scent, this color, and Miss Pym liking her, trusting her, were a wave which she let flow over her and surmount that hatred, that monster, surmount it all, and it lifted her up. That also is so beautiful, because Clarissa, Mrs. Dalloway, sometimes feels that people are looking down on her for her parties, like thinking that she's frivolous and that all the little details she takes so much pleasure in are superficial. But actually, like the picking out of flowers at the shop, by actively choosing these things, you know, by letting them kind of flow over her and letting them wash away the hatred, like they become a sort of powerful tool for her to regain calm, for her to defeat that monster. Sometimes people imagine that like if you like superficial happy things, like you're not actually aware of the monster and aware of the hatred and aware of the battle. But I just thought that was a great kind of scenario showing that that's not true at all. You still have to do battle with the monster, but all the little things around you can help you. Speaking of delightful little things, I reread The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery. This is our June read-along book in my Discord group, which if you're ever interested in joining, you can always just shoot me an email, emma@bookishprincess.com, and I'll send you the link to join. We are doing a video chat tomorrow afternoon, so Saturday, June, whatever the day after tomorrow is, if you're watching this the day it's being posted, at 1 Eastern. So if you're already in Discord, make sure you hop on and join us. I ended up reading this, rereading it, all in one day because it was so delightful. I didn't want to put it down and I didn't want it to end. And I think it's my favorite Ellen Montgomery. It's so charming. It's just everything you could want from an Ellen Montgomery book. You have the beautiful descriptions of nature and like the, Canadian wilderness, so lovely, beautifully described. You have funny, interesting, annoying characters in the little village. You have the quirky, eccentric characters who kind of become the main focus of the novel. Valencia Sterling is our heroine. Isn't that just such a beautiful name, Valencia? But her whole family calls her Doss, which is awful. And her whole family has kind of been keeping her down. Like, they're very judgmental, very like correct, and not very forgiving or not very broad-minded. And all of her life, she's just gone along with it. But she's almost 30 and she's always been a little different, which is partly why, of course, they've kept her down so much over the years. Surely this isn't a spoiler. I don't know if this is a spoiler, but there's your pseudo warning. For what it's worth, Valencia is destined to wake up, and it's really only the first, say, 50 pages or so that are her stuck in that first situation. So if you're like reading it and you're like, oh no, is this gonna go on and on? I feel like in some of the Ellen Montgomery books, and I remember especially in the second Emily of New Moon book, it was just so punishing in some ways. I mean, I like that series, but like the character was just going through some really hard knocks. However, you don't have to worry about that in The Blue Castle. It's only like the first 50 pages or so, and then, such delight. Let's see, what passages did I mark down? Mrs. Frederick was one of those women who can make their anger felt all over a house. Walls and doors are no protection from it. There's another line that says, Valencia would sooner have offended God than her aunt because God would forgive her, but her aunt wouldn't. Here's a description of her at the post office. Valencia rather liked to stand in the office and watch Mr. Carew, the gray-bearded, Santa Clausy old clerk, handing out letters to the lucky people who did get them. He did it with such a detached, impersonal, Jove-like air, as if it did not matter in the least to him what supernal joys or shattering horrors might be in those letters for the people to whom they were addressed. I love that. That's such a great way to describe the postman. Ellen Montgomery clearly had very strong opinions about houses, because I think there's a house, probably several houses, in Anne of Green Gables where like she just likes it on sight and she thinks it looks so friendly and nice, like a nice person. But there's a house in this town that Valencia describes it. A house like that is a blasphemy because it's so ugly. When Valencia starts just like telling the truth and like saying exactly what she thinks, it's hilarious. Fear is the original sin, wrote John Forster. Almost all the evil in the world has its origin in the fact that someone is afraid of something. Yes, John Forster, I won't tell you about him, but he is part of the story. We hear lots of excerpts from John Forster's books, and there was one I was gonna read out, but did I not mark it? Sometimes when I'm enjoying a book, I try to have my pen out so that I can mark things that I like, and they're easier to find later. Like right now as I'm filming. But if I'm enjoying a book, I usually just don't bother to get out the pen, and then of course I regret it. Here's a beautiful, beautiful house with a description of all the pets that they have at the Blue Castle. Our living room windows face west and east. It's wonderful to have a room where you can see both sunrise and sunset. I love that because this room faces west and east, which there are a lot of trees. So it's not like you have a perfect view, but I still love it to see the sunrise light coming in and then the sunset light coming in. I have two cats there, Banjo and Good Luck, adorable animals. Banjo is a big, enchanting gray devil cat. Striped, of course. I don't care a hang for any cat that hasn't stripes. I never knew a cat who could swear as genteelly and effectively as Banjo. His only fault is that he snores horribly when he is asleep. Luck is a dainty little cat, always looking wistfully at you as if he wanted to tell you something. Maybe he will pull it off sometime. Once in 1,000 years, one cat is allowed to speak. My cats are philosophers. Neither of them ever cries over spilt milk. Two old crows live in a pine tree on the point, and I'm reasonably neighborly. Call him Nip and Tuck. And I have a demure little tame owl named Leander. I brought him up from a baby, and he lives over on the mainland and chuckles to himself of nights. and bats. It's a great place for bats at night. Ah, the cats obviously were wonderful. I was reading this book with Cymbeline in my lap, and I was hoping to film like this sort of discussion of the Blue Castle with Cymbeline sitting in my lap. But as soon as I tried to like, you know, get the camera set up and get a microphone set up, she was like, nope, I'm done. Cymbeline is willing to sit with me often these days. It's funny, when she was a tiny baby kitten, of course, very memorably, she climbed up in my lap uninvited and then invited herself into my house and became a member of the family. But then as she was growing up, you know, kittens are full of energy and she would almost never sit in my lap. But now she's, what, 9 months, 10 months old? She's getting to be quite a big cat, pretty much full grown, and she does explore the backyard all day. And so she is now willing, when I bring her in, she's willing to curl up and take a nap in my lap, which is really fun. But she definitely still has a lot of attitude, and as soon as she's done, she'll let you know. Like one time she just got up and went to the door, the back door, and was like, excuse me, can you let me out? Because I want to go out now. I don't think she swears, even genteelly, like Banjo. But I love the way Ella Montgomery describes Banjo as this just enigmatic. He's such an enigmatic cat. Speaking of Cymbeline, I have been making some progress on the book of Cymbeline. I mentioned in my morning routine, I like to write more and pursue more writing projects. And the first one that I'm trying to tackle is the book of Cymbeline, about my kitten Cymbeline and how she arrived, because it was very much like something out of a fairy tale. I have about 5,000 words so far and a couple drawings, because it is going to be more of like a children's book, although a book anyone could enjoy, but it's not going to be a full-length novel. And it is going to have some little illustrations to go along with it. As I've been trying to do the illustrations, it's hard because I feel like nothing can be as cute as Cymbeline herself, especially when she was so tiny and adorable. But I'm going to give it my best try. I'm hoping to get the ebook out in the fall, maybe September. We'll see. September is alarmingly close when you stop and think about it. I'm thinking maybe throughout these last summer months, there might be some Fridays where I skip an upload to try to focus more on getting this project done, because even though I have been trying to, you know, find a daily spot for it in my daily routine, it's just challenging also having the video, the YouTube uploads, because, you know, it's all in my spare time. I work a regular full-time job that's, you know, totally separate from my channel, so sometimes it's just hard to have multiple creative projects going in your spare times. But then again, I have some exciting summer trips coming up, so like I also kind of want to be able to get those videos edited and uploaded soon, but I don't know, I might have to just accept the fact that, you know, they will be done gradually, which is the way I usually do it. The Chronos Club video I uploaded recently, I had filmed 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago. So it's funny, I always have this little voice in the back of my head that's like, oh, but couldn't you get it done sooner? Like, couldn't you get it finished? But then I know if I pushed myself to try to like upload instantly, I would just give up on YouTube. So it's like, nope, I'm gonna do it at my own pace, do it when I have time for it. And it is more fun actually when more time has gone by, because then it's like getting to relive the trip and you kind of forgot all these little details that I remember when I watched the footage back. And I would really like to get this book of Cymbeline finished. So anyway, that is what I have been up to in June. I already did a whole little garden tour video, so if you're interested in hearing about what's in my garden and how things have been growing, make sure you go and check that out. Posted it just earlier this week on the first day of summer. I hope all of you guys have been having a wonderful summer so far. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you guys again soon, and until then, I hope you have some wonderful summertime fun. Stay bookish. Bye, guys.